I was just scanning across the 2 full pages of Zoom windows and how amazing it is that we have 35 people connected this morning. It's very amazing and humbling for me. Here I am. I'm sitting wearing a rakusu that was sewn for me by members of our sangha in Austin. And every time I put it on, I say a brief chant invoking the wisdom of the Buddhas and invoking the compassion of the Buddhas, and promising to wear it in the spirit in which it was made and in the spirit of the teachings of the Buddha. But I know that I am clothed in compassion and in generosity. And that really, for someone like me who has had a lifetime of stewing in feelings of being unworthy and not trusting other people, I'll talk about this more later. This is just an incredible gift and an incredible turn for my life. So I want to start by saying that. So my topic for today is a phrase from the Genjo Koan, the Great Realization of Delusion. And I'm going to focus on delusion today, and Laurie is going to talk tomorrow about liberation and how the aspects that I'm going to lay out today actually can become a scaffolding for liberation, a way to reach forward into and to reach deeply into our own lives and rebuild what there's all these structures that seem to get in our way. So I just say that again by preface. The Genjo Koan is a letter that Eihei Dogen, the Buddhist teacher in Japan, who had studied in China to bring a different way of practicing Buddhism back to Japan. It's a letter that he wrote to a lay practitioner in the year 1233 in the Common Era, as we know it. And he writes a phrase, "Those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas." So please take a moment to read, if you can, if you have the chant book on page 34, the Appamada chant book, it's the second paragraph on that page. And just take a moment to read the whole paragraph for the immediate context of it. And then I'm just going to read that one part of it again. Those who have great realization of delusion are Buddhas. Now, how could that be? It's a very puzzling statement to me, but one I really love. As we chant every day or every weekday here at Appamada, at the end of morning zazen, and as I have learned in much of my life, delusions are inexhaustible. So the second part of the chant that I'm talking about, delusions are inexhaustible, is I vow to end them. That seems a bit more difficult, of course, but I'm just thinking of the famous lines attributed to Abraham Lincoln. If I make my enemies my friends, have I not destroyed my enemies? By analogy, how does one end a delusion? Simply by realizing that it's a delusion, simply by seeing through it. And, simple, right? No problem. On the other hand, being without end, being numberless, delusions have a way of reinforcing themselves. So at any rate, For myself, it gives me a kind of a hope to realize that in working to actualize Buddha nature in my life, to get out of the way of the Buddha nature that I know and that I have felt in my body and mind is already there, we have an endless supply of delusions to see through. And as Dogen says, those who have great realization of delusions are Buddhas. So I'm gonna devote my talk to just cataloging a lot of delusions. And I'll be asking you later on to consider your own favorite flavors of delusion in our shared activity this afternoon. The Buddha told many parables and constructed many dialogues to demonstrate that our normal everyday experience of ourselves and our relationship to the world is delusory. His great breakthrough as a teacher came through when he saw that everything and everyone that exists arises simultaneously and passes away ceaselessly, and thus has no independent existence. Ignorance of this reality, he said, causes suffering. What Stephen Batchelor calls the fourfold task was what the Buddha called his single life work, teaching people to comprehend suffering, rooted in delusion that itself was rooted in ignorance, to let go of the arising of reactivity on meeting that suffering, to behold the ceasing of that reactivity, and to cultivate an eightfold path that is grounded in the perspective of mindful awareness that leads one to become self-reliant in the practice of the Dharma. I heard a talk by Sharon Salzberg recently in which she said that we can take refuge in Buddha, and when we do so, we're not talking about a divinity or a savior, but an actual human being who used human capacities to see through common delusions. If he did it, we can. And this is a point that Dogen makes over and over again, and other writers as well. One of the parables that the Buddha talked about, or told about our mistaken sense of solid, unchanging identity, concerned a monk named Nagasena, who meets a king. Nagasena, the king comes across this monk. He says, "Who are you?" And Nagasena says, "Well, I can tell you my name, but that's not who I am." And the king says, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, consider it, king. You came here in a chariot. I'm looking at you. You're standing in your chariot. But what is a chariot? Except, well, let's see. He then points to the thing called the chariot, and he deconstructs the word, pointing out that the chariot was actually just a temporary assembly of parts: wheels, axles, a platform to stand on, a way to attach horses, etc. Nagasena points out that human beings are also just a collection of parts given a conceptual designation, a kind of shorthand designation. That there's a head, which itself is a conceptual designation, limbs, lungs, intestines, muscles, and so on, bones. They have gradually come to their current arrangement and are gradually changing into other arrangements until they are going to no longer cohere into a human form. This is a powerful analogy, but it doesn't, in a way, it doesn't seem that compelling to me, because it seems to focus more on semantics. Like, okay, if the word doesn't mean what we think it means, does that mean it's bad? The Buddha also tackled the basics of human experience, though, in a more basic way. For example, he asked people to examine what was going on with their senses, and his teaching goal in every case was to show that we are not in possession of and shouldn't really identify with the things that we think are ours. Our hearing, for example, gave many examples of dealing with sensory things that we think constitute us, and he pointed out that yes, that the sense of who we are right now is arising out of the contact that we have with the sensory world around us, what seems to be exterior to us, but that there is a mistake or a series of mistakes that are built into that. When you hear something, as you do thousands of times per day, that hearing reinforces a feeling that there is a you during the hearing. But the Buddha says, all that can rationally be said is that a faculty of hearing, which seems to be familiar to a sense of a continuing self, is interacting with external phenomena. If your hearing was really yours, he said, you could control it. You could turn it off. You could direct it however you want. But of course, this is not our experience. Our hearing goes on whether we want it to or not. We can pay attention to it and stop paying attention to it sometimes, but it's going on by itself. He extends this logic to the other senses as well. And he also tackled a much more kind of abstract realm of delusory constructions when he talked about the 5 skandhas, or heaps of human experience, of which the senses were only a small part. There was form, this sense of materiality, that I'm in a human body, that I'm here in this world, I'm not able to walk through the wall because it's solid and I'm solid, those kinds of things. And then the next skandha, feeling, and this is not, I've heard this explained many times at Appamada, this is not feeling like our emotional response to things, but the very, very basic way we have of leaning either forward or back, of taking in our experience as something beneficial for us or something that we don't want, or something that's neutral and then quickly become bored with. As he pointed out, this is a very, very immediate thing that happens much faster than any rational thought, and much faster than any kind of formulation that we make, and that it colors everything. We can't stop that, just like we can't stop hearing. And then there's perception, which again is meeting things which seem to be outside us and which reinforces our sense of separation and our sense of having a separate self over and over again. And mental formations, which is when we start to conceptualize our experiences and say, oh, that's the same thing as happened yesterday, or that is a continuation of what was happening a split seconds ago, or something like that. That these conceptualizations blend into a kind of shorthand that goes from the very basics of perception up to abstract thoughts that we can go, but they are mental formations. And finally, consciousness, where all the previous 4 flow together. In numerous teachings, the Buddha also points out something really important to my modern way of thinking, that consciousness is never a smooth flow, but there seems to be almost a stream of conflicting emotions and anxiety. And so I am seeing that I walked in here and left a crucial piece of paper in the other room that I was going to read from. So I again ask your compassion and indulgence. I'll be right back. Thank you for waiting. Appreciate it. I want to say that the Buddha also got into himself a very conceptual level and very detailed psychological investigation of the sorts of delusions that we repeat over and over again, and that give us the sense that is so strong and provides such a mask over the reality that we also know that we already live in, which is Buddha nature, which is connection to everything. There's a book called The Shape of Suffering by the Theravadan monk and author Thanissaro Bhikkhu, in which he quotes the Buddha as saying that the experience of stress, pain, and suffering is not a simple thing. As the Buddha once observed, we respond to its complexity in one of two ways. And here's the quote. What is the result of stress, monks? There are some cases in which a person overcome with pain, his mind exhausted, grieves, mourns, laments, beats his breast, and becomes bewildered. Or one overcome with pain, his mind exhausted, comes to search outside. Who knows a way or two to stop this pain? That person asks. I tell you, monks, that stress results in either bewilderment or in search. And these are the issues that the Buddha focused on for 45 years. He said it over and over again. I teach dukkha and the cessation of dukkha. And he enumerated the factors, starting with the most fundamental ones, and going to the most complex one. And this is what's called the 12-fold chain of causality or dependent arising. And it's very abstruse, and you will see that it's very circular, and there are ways in which it seems to involve jumping from one type of experience to another type of experience, from psychology to perception to other things, and to reinforce and to again, just lots of circular logic. It begins, ignorance, not seeing things in terms of the Four Noble Truths of stress, its origination, its cessation, and the path to cessation. Fabrication, and please do not take notes on this. There's a simplified version of this in the document I sent out last night that can be a guide for later on. But the language that that Thanissaro Bhikkhu uses here is, I think, very, very helpful for right now. Fabrication, the process of intentionally shaping states of body and mind. And these processes themselves are of three sorts: bodily fabrication, including the in and out breath; verbal fabrication, directing your thoughts and evaluation through the parts of your mind that use words; mental fabrication, that is feeling tones of pleasure and fabrication of perception, the mental labels applied to objects of the senses for the purposes of memory and recognition. And then 3, consciousness of the 6 sense media. 4, name and form, or as Thanissaro Bhikkhu described it, mental and physical phenomena. Again, their interaction between the interior space of mind and the exterior space of phenomena, including feeling, perception, intention, contact, and attention. And then 5, the internal sense media, the eyes, the ears, the nose, tongue, body, and intellect, which, as he's presenting it here, these don't give us direct contact with the world. They are fields that are limited by our physical reality. We can only see light in a certain wavelength. We can only hear sound of a certain wavelength. Others are simply invisible to us. We know that now because we have non-human instrumentation that can demonstrate it to us. And we know that bees and butterflies see an entirely different world than we do because they are dealing with other types of light than we do. All our confidence of understanding the physical world and the interactions of the physical world has been shaken up over and over again as we realize all the ways in which we, by being in this human body that has, where things are kind of averaged out, we're of an average size, and we think that, and we think that that provides a yardstick for measuring other things. But in fact, that is a delusion that leads to as many errors as it does to making sense of the world in many cases, not every time. And then contact at the sense media, this is number 6. That is, when a sense organ meets a sense object, the eye meets with a form and gives rise to consciousness. And then number 7, feeling based on contact with the 6 sense media. Number 8, craving for the objects of the 6 sense media. Here we have fallen over from a kind of ontology and phenomenology into the psychological realm and craving. And this craving can focus on any of the 6 sense media and can take on any of 3 forms. We can have sensuality craving, craving for sensual pleasure, and the kind of opposite, becoming craving, craving to assume an identity in the world of experience, or non-becoming craving, craving for the end of an identity in the world of experience. Then number 9, clinging, passion and delight, focusing on the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, fabrication, and consciousness. This clinging can take many different forms, again, sensuality, views, and then finally, or not finally, but getting close to the end here, becoming on any level, the level of sensuality, the level of form, the level of formlessness. Number 11, birth, the actual assumption of any identity on any of these 3 levels. And finally, number 12, the aging and death of that identity with its attendant sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. So I pointed out the circularity in which these arguments reinforce each other and appeal to each other. It's obviously a very deep kind of examination of human psychology to be able to do this. And apparently most of the work of it predated the Buddha, and a lot of it went on in Buddhist schools after the time of the Buddha, which have now pretty much disappeared. There were apparently in India for the several hundred years following the time of the Buddha, up to 16 or 17 different schools that focused on this kind of psychological investigation. And we see echoes of it in the phrases of Dogen, where he says, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. But as pointed to by Dogen, it's a lot more direct and a lot more in the moment than this kind of catalog of psychological states that the early Buddhists were pointing to. What I would like to point to right now is, what kind of a world is it where birth comes after 10 other steps? What kind of, how does this fit with human experience? So the explanation is that when the Buddha was talking about this, he was in fact describing a kind of cosmological situation. It was an origin story. And so far as I can tell, the only origin story within Buddhism, that the rest of the Buddha's teachings are very focused on liberation within this lifetime and liberation within the capacities of the human mind, the everyday capacity of the human mind to appreciate, to find, to hunger for, to find, and to appreciate truth, and to use that as a way of liberation. And there are ways in which, in the Theravadan tradition, these things are reordered. The processes are reordered and cut down to 5, beginning with birth, and then ignorance, and so on, and then and actually focusing on what happens moment to moment as we construct our identities by our interactions with the world, and how those pass away and then get reconstituted in a kind of flow that we turn into a continuing source of delusion for ourselves. And there are analogies to this in our daily experience that I think are instructive. One of them is breathing. I mean, we breathe. Air comes in, we take the oxygen out, we breathe out, we get rid of carbon dioxide that we don't need anymore, that's a byproduct of processes in our body. And it's not, and then we have to do it again. I saw in the book, The 5 Invitations, a statement that each of us is about 2 minutes away from death, but that each in-breath resets the clock. So there are these processes which again require us to start over again. When we get hungry, we eat, and that propels us on to the next thing until we get hungry again. And come back, computer. What I've laid out is a pessimistic sounding collection of reasons that seem to boil down to the thought that everything we have ever done and can ever do is so covered up with delusion that we can't find our way out of it. That it's all a story that we have constructed, that we just, that we're lost in. But remember what the Buddha said, that dukkha either just compounds itself or it can lead us to search. And even, again, as Laurie will describe tomorrow, can provide a scaffolding for healing itself. I want to add a couple of other piles to the heaps that I was describing before that really speak to me and that have been highlighted for me by my reading of a book called The Grand Delusion by Steve Hagen. The Grand Delusion, things we know but don't believe. And he just talks about physical processes. And to me, these are all ways in which I am a stranger to myself in my own body and in my own mind. I can think, oh, I'm breathing, but really? Am I in any way in control of the millions of muscle fibers that expand and contract in my abdomen so that I draw air in and push air out? Not only that, but in each of the cells that make up these muscle fibers, there are thousands of myosin molecules that convert energy into motion. They take ATP from the cell, which is created in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, as people jokingly say. And they convert that into motion by hooking on to some other proteins called actin and making the cells contract. And they do this, why? Just because it's what they do. It has nothing to do with anything volitional by me. And it's hard to see how I'm even connected, except that I know that it's going on in what I, for shorthand, call my body. But the life that is going on seems to be not just at the cellular level, but at the molecular level. Another thing, think of the other cells that are contracting, the other muscles that are contracting to push your blood into your lungs. And then this very complex relationship of how oxygen gets into the blood and gets transferred out into the body, while carbon dioxide is released so that the blood cells can take on more oxygen. And all these muscles pumping and contracting, and all these molecular activities happening that feel like they're us, but that's only because we take ourselves of a certain size as a yardstick and measure things against it and kind of smear out all the differences that underlie it. Again, I eat and I drink and my hunger and thirst return. It happens every day. It happens to everybody. It happened to the Buddha after he attained nirvana. He described hunger and thirst as sources of suffering, or at least as examples that can be used as analogies for the sources of suffering. But even though he had attained enlightenment, those processes went on. And it's instructive to us every day that he proceeded through his life knowing that he had engaged in delusion, and that he was free of those delusions, even as they were renewing moment by moment. So we all live in bodies that need nourishment from outside, and that's something that we share with all living things. All living things on the planet are constructed molecule by molecule by the DNA that makes proteins and other substances and directs processes within individual cells that then form organs, and the organs form the chariot, the body that we inhabit and think of as ours. But again, if anything is alive, it appears to be the DNA, which constructs this robe that we sit in. Not the body, but the DNA. And it allows the body allows the DNA to move around, to nourish to gain nourishment, and then to reproduce. And that's its main goal. It's just getting out there and doing its best to reproduce, apparently. And then finally, I want to talk, and I am coming to the end. Finally, I want to talk about these kind of transpersonal things that are very powerful and constitute so much of the delusions that we live in. There's our language. Indo-European languages, like English, and like Pali even, like the language that was spoken by the Buddha during his time, relies heavily, or I don't know how else to put it, relies heavily on nouns, on reifying things, reifying processes, and treating them as solid and separate. So that's built into our language. So, the fact that we make this mistake over and over again of treating things as solid and separate, that is something that comes to us through our culture and our language that is very difficult to examine. It takes learning and skill to be able to examine it and see around the edges of it. And I will say that there are some things about growing up as social animals, as mammals. In my own life, I'm thinking of something, but as social animals, as mammals, and particularly humans, which have a long period in which they are defenseless things outside the mother's body, but who need constant care while their brain is growing and while they're taking in sensory data in a completely marvelous and beautiful way. Nevertheless, that the process of being helpless marks us for the rest of our lives. And that before we have words, we are relying on our caregivers, that we have feelings that result from the way we feel that we can attach to our caregivers. And those can color our lives. I know that there are psychiatrists and psychologists and mental health caregivers who know a lot more about this than I am. So pardon me if I'm doing violence to important work, and I invite you to add to our discussion this afternoon where I may be going astray. But I just want to say that it's very easy, and apparently, or the evidence is that it's very easy for things to go astray in these early formative times of our infancy, and that those actually then mark our lives for the rest of our lives in our relationships with other people and in the way we see the world. So here I am. I'm almost a 70-year-old man. I mean, I'm a man who's almost 70 years old, and I had loving parents. I had a stable family, and so on. But somehow I still came out into my interactions with the world with a kind of frazzled propensity to jump from things to things, from one thing to another. Some what's conceptually called maybe ADD, something like that. And also a sense that I have to hide that from other people, and that I cannot trust, I cannot expect that I'm going to have support from other people in any interaction that I have. Now, I know better than that as an adult, but at the level at which these parts of myself are still alive, they still hold this belief that I got somehow and carry forward that I can't trust the world, and that there's something wrong, and that's because there's something wrong with me. So and again, we see this playing out in lots and lots of people's lives. And finally, the last thing I want to point to in this transnational or transpersonal space that we all live in is that as humans, as social animals, we have a very strong propensity to want to keep our own genes going by loving and protecting those closest to us, family members, and those who look like us. And that along with that comes a propensity as human beings that we are embedded in to exclude others who are not in our small group, who don't look like us, who don't use the same language we use, who have different ways of organizing their experience, and that this can be elaborated and has been elaborated countless times in our history into stories that we tell ourselves, which allow us to kill other people, to dispossess other people, to treat other people as subhumans whom we can own and continue to mistreat. And that these are delusions that come to us from the mammalian inheritance that nurtured us as, small infants, and then as members of an ongoing society. So that's pretty dark. I'm going to stop the talk right there at the darkest point, and I will invite you in our activity later today to think of your own, as I said, your own favorite flavors of delusion. And when I say favorite, of course, I'm using that word as a joke. But those things that as Flint often has said, are the sorrows and the pains that we hold on to because we identify with them so much that if we let them go, we won't see ourselves as existing anymore, that will lose something really important to ourselves if we let go these delusions. So if you would, just spend some time thinking about that, maybe writing about it when we have our activity this afternoon. So thank you very much for your indulgence, and thank you for I just feel the attention and the kindness that's been given to me as I've been talking. And I invite any questions. It's now 11:48, and let me find the schedule. Is that right? No, 10:11:57. So it's not so late as I thought. So we have some time for discussion. So I invite any questions. It would be best to raise your hand using the raise hand feature in chat. Or I'm sorry, it's in reactions, is it not? I'm sorry, who is the monitor this morning? Is it Rosemary?
It was
No, I'm sorry, Maria.
Maria,
pardon me. Thank you. So I see, Maria, can you call on the participants who have raised their hands? Because I'm having trouble with my glasses. Okay, well, I think there may be
I can try to help you if you like. If Maria's not available right now, I can.
Okay, I'm going to call on Effie first because I saw her hand first. Effie Bradley. Okay, Effie cannot unmute herself, and I don't think that I am a co-host, so I can't do it.
Let's see.
No, I am a co-host. Hang on.
There.
Okay. It looks like everyone is able to unmute. Oh, good. Effie, you're unmuted. So good.
Yes, I am. I was wondering if you could again describe what we're going to share this afternoon. Something about delusion and what we lose when we give our delusion, something like that.
You're muted.
That's so crazy. I will come back to that later in introducing that. So I would like to just invite other reactions for right now.
Okay, Joan?
Yeah, Rosemary, yours?
Joan?
Oh, Joan, thank you. Joan Harmon.
Oh, she can't?
Okay, wait.
Okay. Oh, good.
Well, Joel, thank you for this discussion. It was very dense. I'm working with it. And so I'm just going to go to the one thing that I know for sure I didn't get. And that was your discussion of feeling. You were saying it's not as we normally would. And could you talk about it maybe again?
Okay. I am not muted. I hope everyone can hear me. So in the Buddhist description, what we call feelings, the kind of emotional reactions to events and to things that happen in our lives, are actually much farther down the road than what is being used by the Buddhist term here. Feeling is more like what happens in our lizard brain in the base of our brain, the earliest part of the brain to form, according to evolutionary theorists, that the part that is closest to the autonomic nervous system, which keeps our heart pumping even when we're asleep, keeps us breathing even when we're asleep. And in that part of the brain, apparently, we make judgments about phenomena that occur, that they are beneficial or threatening, or that we can ignore them. And so think of yourself driving at 60 miles an hour down a freeway, and suddenly somebody's coming at you in your lane. If it took time, if it required the time that would be needed for you to process that thought before you reacted, you might not survive. Instead, your brain tells you, this is a dangerous situation, make a sudden movement. Do something to get out of this dangerous situation. This has been a great evolutionary advantage to living creatures ever since it developed. As things could move around, that they could get away from predators, and then the opposite, that they could prey on other animals. If they could, looking for food, they could say, oh, there's some food over there, and go to it really fast before the slow processes of thought had to be engaged. So that's what is my understanding of what the Buddhist term of feeling entails. It's this rapid coloration of everything as good for me, bad for me, or something that I can ignore. I see Laurie raised her hand. Do you want to add to the
Can I add
discussion?
to that? Yeah, we have done a little exercise that I think it demonstrates it really clearly at Appamada, and you can try this yourself. If you get in a group of people, you take the Sangha, and then you just have people wander around in the room, in the Zendo, and notice the impact, what comes up for you as you pass each person. And you'll notice that you're on a bodily level. It's not even a thought. I suppose it's a thought too, but I think the thought comes after it. There's an immediate reaction to, oh, I like that person. And you kind of lean that way. You kind of, oh, the smile comes on your face. Or if it's someone that you're unsure about, you don't know very well, or what have you, have a different reaction, and you immediately kind of lean the other way. You may start walking the opposite direction. I don't mean turning your back on them, but just you lean the other way. Or some people you don't have a reaction to at all. So it's really amazingly immediate, like Joel said. And you can try that out and just see how that is, how you, before you even think, then you have a thought about it afterward. Oh, I think, I feel this way because of whatever. But your body just, and your brain just makes immediate. I don't know if that helps or not, but I just thought I'd share that.
There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman, eminent philosopher, in which he describes this process. And he makes a point that a lot of what we think we decide rationally is, in fact, decided at this level of what the Buddhists would call feelings. And that the rational part that goes into what we describe as our decisions is, in fact, after the fact rationalization. That we make up reasons for things that we decide that come out of this level of reaction. That is prior to the other levels of perception, that as we make sense of them, and way prior to the part where we can add words to them and construct a story about why it is good or bad or whatever. But they are that these are things that come up out of a operation of the body that is not in our control, but that we can see through, and we can see as delusory by spending time. And just just to make a little elaboration on what Laurie was saying, I've been walking around the Zendo by myself this morning, doing kinhin, and I actually had many thoughts as I was walking. It's like, I miss judging other people while I'm walking in kinhin. I remember, being here with other people and thinking, oh, that person's lagging, that person's going too fast, and that person's lost in her thoughts and should stand up straight and look around, and that's, that was a fun memory to have of all things.
Joel, do you want to take more questions?
Yes, please. We've got 8 more minutes.
Okay, Becky? You're muted. You're muted.
Okay.
You had it. Oh, Becky, you're back muted. You had it. It flicked off for a minute. Could you try one more time? Darn.
I've just unmuted you. Hang on, Becky. There we go. I've just unmuted you.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
That's good. That's good. So, of course, I garbled up the question I had. Now in my brain, I've garbled it up in a way that, I had worked out before. But it seems to me, I'll start with an "it seems to me" and then ask the question. It seems to me that we live in a continuously more complexified society in terms of speed that it goes at, in terms of the number of things that are embraced by the general society that we live in that are actually even inimical to living our vows, that and like completely, so that as a person walking in this world without a framework to talk with about these issues and delusion and reality, that when I came, I didn't know if you're talking about delusions the way, I didn't know exactly what you were going to call delusions, right? But there's ones that have to do with the world's idea of delusion. And that's not really what you're talking about, because you're talking about the ones that we make up to keep away from ourselves, to hold our life together in. Is that right? Is that?
Yes and no. The things that we make up for ourselves that are built into the structures of our perception and action in the world, and that are also handed to us by the world, from our culture, from our language, etc., that are perhaps close to what the world would call delusion. And again, the reason that I wanted to talk about this is pointing back to what Dogen says. Those who greatly realize delusion are Buddhas. This is a crazy statement, and yet it seems to be, at least to me, important to just be aware of the delusions that I am holding and to use them, or to use that awareness to allow me to have a little bit more freedom in my activities, so that, you know, I'm having trouble coming up with a good example, but just to be able to be free from the things that yesterday might have been so convincing to me that I could not have any sphere of action or any freedom of action around them. And that's a process that is renewing faster than the breaths we take, faster than the emotion thoughts that we have. It's an ongoing process that is embedded in a whole lot of delusions, but that provides within them a whole lot of opportunities, renewing over and over again, to turn toward freedom instead of turning toward the delusion, or only accepting the delusion. Does that make sense as an answer?
Yes, it does. It does. Thank you. And I probably will come up with some more soon.
Okay. Good. So I saw Robin's hand raised before. Robin, you're on mute. Okay.
Okay.
No, you're on. Okay.
Other people were ahead of me. My question's really quick, and it may be super kindergarten. There seems to be a relationship. Is there a waterfall effect through these 5 skandhas as well? Like a cyclical relationship within these skandhas as well as the larger 14 whatchamacallits?
Yeah. 12, 14, whatever they are. There are analogies in which these are presented in Chan and in Chinese versions of Buddhism as mirrors that are arranged around a candle, that are reflecting the central candle and each other, and picking up light from each other as well.
That's a great metaphor. That totally answered my question, because there's obviously a relationship between them, but it's not even as simple as a cyclical one. It's one of those. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think Anne was ahead of me.
And that ignorance is central to the operation of each. So I will stop calling on people and ask our monitor to help me out.
Yeah, I know Anne was ahead of me, and maybe someone else too.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's Anne next. Anne's up next.
Okay. Well, mine is, a pretty basic question about why is any of this any different than the other delusions we're trying to get rid of? And why is the idea that Buddha nature is inherent and there is no separate self, why are those ideas and this turning toward freedom any different than previous ideas? Why are we not just putting another hat on top of our head? I mean, I'm reminded of that line in the Shin Shin Ming about the more you think about these things, the further you are away from it.
I'm thinking you got me on that one. It is, why privilege this set of ideas? Why privilege something as positive and others as negative? And as Sinchan says in the Shin Sun Ming, trying to differentiate between what is good and bad is the primal disease of the mind. I guess the reason that I would say for myself is that it points to a way to examine what I'm believing, and that's all. And that's a container big enough to include the things that I'm wanting to go toward and the things that I'm not wanting to go toward, and so on. But what your question is pointing to is a much subtler level even than this very subtle level of discrimination that was being described by these teachers from the past. Do you have any further thoughts on how not to put another hat on your head?
Laurie, were you wanting to say something then?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that yes, there are a lot of delusions, but the central issue here is truth, actually. Truth of life as it is. What's really going on, and what is correct view? It's not merely just saying everything is wrong, but what is really going on, to see beyond just our enchanted way of looking at things. And by seeing what's really going on, we can go to the next step. We can have a thought about which direction to take and do it with skillfully. Does that help at all, Anne, or not? I don't think we're talking about right and wrong so much as what is reality. What's true?
Joan?
I'm listening. I'm sorry, is there a question for me?
I think Joan just wants to add something.
Oh, Joan, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. Thank you.
Sorry, and I'm having trouble. I just wanted to add, when these things happen, I always think of the middle way. And it's, yes, all these thoughts are just illusions. They're just stuff in our heads. And yet, that doesn't mean we shouldn't think. We use our reasoning to make decisions. And so we don't throw out all thoughts, but we do understand they're illusions, but then we also use that to our benefit when we can. And I'd call that the middle way. So some of these things that the Buddha is pointing out are thoughts that we should keep thinking about as we look at things, as we look at the thoughts that are delusions. I don't know if that's clear to anyone but me.
I have one thought that I would like to add also, just to what Joan was saying and Laurie also was pointing to in this notion of reality. And that is, the Buddha pointed out that we can try things out. We can see in our lives whether things make us happy or unhappy in a broad sense of happiness, that is according with a free life that is not sunk in pain and that is not driving us from one side of the room to the other, trying to get away from the pain that we are. That we have experiences that show us what that freedom looks like. And that has something to do with the answer for what you were asking about, at least for me, that has something to do with it.
Thank you, Joel. It's Effie next. I've just unmuted you, Effie.
Effie?
Yeah, I think I just didn't put my hand down from earlier. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so Rosemary.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to add a little something to the question of sensation. Was it sensation? I'm sorry, feeling, and in the sense of reaction and what Joel, you were talking about in terms of the brain. And that the idea of, I think it could be helpful, the idea of what's dangerous or what's safe is a lot of times with what draws us towards or away. And as a therapist, the trauma in the history, it's much easier for me to conceptualize the whole thing, because when that's there in that early year period, as you were saying, Joel, the current situation, which is not in fact dangerous, that part of the brain feels it that way, and that's the delusion. And sorting that out is very hard, but it's possible. And then when you can see that the brain wanting to do that, the heart rate is beating fast and all, it can turn that part of the brain off when you connect it to what that history was. So that's a whole big process, but I just felt the idea of the safety and danger could be helpful. Thank you.
There's a book called Buddha's Brain, Rick Hansen and Richard Menzies, that I quote from over and over again, and I should have mentioned it as part of my talk, but he points out that there's an evolutionary advantage to humans, and indeed to all living creatures, but particularly for humans, to have a negative bias, to remember everything bad that's ever happened and hang on to it, and to let the good things that happen slide by. Because if you miss something good, that's a shame. But if you miss something important that is dangerous, you are in danger. And so our brains tend to organize around that. And what they argue is that builds up like plaque over time in our brains, and that it shapes our thoughts in ways that are more and more and more constricted. So that's
Thank you. Oh, sorry, thank you, Joel. We have 2 minutes left, so I don't know if, would you like to one more person, or would you like to finish there?
Thank you. I was looking at Sunday's schedule, so that's why I was confused about the time. Well, 2 minutes is mostly gone now. So let's relax for a minute. And then at 10:40, we have a period of Zazen. Kinhin, Zazen, and then lunch. So I will ring the bell at 10:40 for supper. And again, my deep thanks